What is the fastest you have ever seen a new coworker get fired? Heard this from a manager I worked with when I worked in fast food. There was this one kid who didn't show up for work. He ditched work often. So the manager called around. Couldn't get anyone to fill in his shift. So she had to fill it for him. A few hours into his shift, the dude ditching shows up with his friends and orders food from that manager. She fired him on the spot. Congratulations. You've been promoted to a customer. A week. I worked in a bar and a new girl started. At work, she seemed a little rough but was fine. One day she finished a shift, sat at the bar, and ordered a red wine with lemonade and ice in it. Not really relevant to the story. Just shows she is clearly insane. Her boyfriend came in. They had a huge domestic in front of my manager and several customers, and she threw her drink over her BF and dramatically stormed out. This is the opposite route here, but I found it amusing. My boss was out of town and I managed a tea shop near a Starbucks years ago. This kid came in foreign and said he was supposed to start today. We were hiring and I trained him, etc. My boss came back 2 days later and had no idea. The kid was in the wrong place, but he stayed with us. Hired on the spot without even applying. First day of work. He walks in. Says what the peep is up Dumbus to the guy that parked next to didn't touch his new Camaro he bought since he got hired. The guy was the CEO of the company I used to work for, on visit to our branch. Literally 10 minutes into his shift he was signing release papers. New guy started on Monday and was gone by Friday. The guy hit some racking in the warehouse with a forklift. Boss saw him do it, and the guy decided to lie about it when asked if he knew what happened. We'll get someone to clean that up. We the ones that got it clean it up. I work construction. We had 2 new hires that were friends starting the same day. Boss told one take a coffee order and come back. Took everyone's money and said he needed his friend to go with him cause it was a big order. They never came back. Not sure if it counts as being fired, but a guy in our basic training threatened a drill sergeant with a bayonet. No idea what happened after he went to the hospital, but I didn't see him again. This was a while ago at my old job. New guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation, whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working the bar, and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care, but the manager did. Manager comes over and tells him to stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of fruit. Manager says really? Followed by come with me to the office. New guy promptly replies with alright man, calm down. I can tell you got that big peep energy for a good reason, followed with cliche wink and nudge from his elbow. In front of me and like 4 other employees. I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin. It was so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid back guy. Hell, the whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big peep line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. You don't tell me what to do. You're a woman. To his trainer. Lasted until management came in that morning and heard about it. I heard a guy say that in his job interview. He was quite desperate for a job. The interviewer was the general manager, and she just got up and left him sitting there. He sat there for a bit before he came to ask what was going on, and she said that she's the GM, and if he won't listen to women there's no point in her saying anything else. I would have told you to go home, but I thought you would prefer to receive the message through my absence. Worked in a grocery store for a while. New guy took a lobster out of the tank and removed the elastic bands on its claws, then proceeded to put it back in the tank. The thing murdered all the other lobsters in the tank. I was halfway expecting a theft attempt by putting said live and free lobster down his pants. I thought he was gonna chase coworkers with it. Guy got hired. While going through orientation realized that his ex-GF worked there too. Turned around and walked right out the front door. Spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovation in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew and just starting renovations on an area with a super tight schedule. So the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these two clowns who show up to do some demolition work. Foreman gives them the talk about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital, so he'd rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman calls me up and says to go over there and clean up now, and that he'd be by shortly to see what the hell was going on. These dudes had dust and broken wall everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall, just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up, and we walk into the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. Guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that at any moment, that wall might give way and crush him. The foreman lost his peeping mind on these guys, kicked them out immediately, and got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice four-letter words were used. Even threatened to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. A 19-year-old kid got hired to work the seafood counter. See him twice and then never again. Asked a Co-Workder what happened. He had closed seafood one night and was walking out of the store and the 5 pounds of crab legs he'd stuffed down the back of his pants fell out in front of the closing manager. It was at a Publix. No, it was not Jamie Swinston. Co-Workder quit his job. Great job. Great pay. Great benefits to work in a radio repair place. I mean, gotta do what you love. And he was also a big radio enthusiast. Got fired the first day on the job for stealing parts for his own radios at home. Took him over a year to get back with us. Surprised they rehired him. He then got fired for being a security risk about a year or so later. Couldn't pass the simple tests given at the end of new hire orientation. Yelled at test facilitator when she wouldn't just take the test for him. Sounds like an engineer my company hired. He was a PhD and really hit it off with the guys in management. Had some female colleagues working under his direction, and he was an absolute peep. Demeaned their work. Blamed them for things not working. Now my colleagues were excellent formulation chemists. He was brought on to lead a new formulation project, and it wasn't working. He would tell them how to do it and it never worked. He kept blaming them for doing it wrong. My Co-Workder got fed up and called him on his bull speak during a big meeting with a prepared presentation describing what they tried, how thoroughly they tried it, why what he proposed would never work, and an alternative solution. He was pissed, but the management guys were extremely knowledgeable and started asking him questions, and it was clear he couldn't answer. Turns out, his wife has a PhD too. And she pretty much did all of his degree work for him, both from a culture where women are not treated equally. He knew absolutely nothing. Not only that, but once everyone got to talking, it was clear just how massive an ash peep this guy was. Sadly, my colleagues had to deal with this for months before everything was said and done. The IT crew at a large government office worked on a ticket system, meaning that the government workers submitted their problem online, and one of the IT guys would pick it up on their end. The new guy just started his first day, logged into a computer at an empty office, and submitted a reinstall in Tyros request, so he could spend all day there. The manager decided to check in on him before lunch, to see how he was doing, and he was completely asleep. Fired before they even finished his hiring paperwork. New director starts. At lunchtime goes to cafeteria, pays for the first salad plate by weight, then goes back twice for refills without paying. Cafeteria has cameras. Cafeteria manager talks to the partner in charge. New director fired before the end of day. 5 days. My boss hired an executive chef. Dude didn't even know how to make a quesadilla. Well done, you pick those in the wild. Fresh quesadillas are the best quesadillas. Guy got hired. Went through training and all that jazz. First day on the floor. He disappeared for 3 hours and then came back high as peep on like meth or something. A manager found him in the bathroom aisle, staring at himself in the mirror. Said manager looked at the cameras after firing him. The guy was there staring at himself for at least 30 minutes. This was a pizza place I worked at in college. New guy was started on Thursday. Fine worker, we showed him the ropes. He was on subs, which is the easiest job. The instructions are right in front of your face. Friday he no call no shows, it's Friday. The busiest night of the week. And he and I were the only kitchen workers that weren't also drivers. Monday a police officer shows up at the restaurant looking for him. No idea what happened as he wasn't there. Tuesday the owner informed me he was let go. Corporate chain restaurant. New server. Aged mid-30s. Third day he was working, we had to fire him mid-shift. Why? Dude went into the public restrooms with other guests clearly and they're using the urinal and started doing lines of blow off on the edge of the sink. Why not just do it in the back with the cooking staff like everyone else? Cause then you might get asked to share. I called a temp agency to get someone to help me count inventory. They sent a guy over with a cast on his arm. That was my first WTF, but I went with it because we were just counting parts. Then I came back from lunch and this dude was in my office chair zoned out and drooling on himself with a can of air duster in his lap. I kicked him awake and escorted him out of my warehouse. Never use that temp agency again. Guy had been working a few days at a barn. Decided to smoke right by bales of hay. Manager saw him and fired him right on the spot. At farms, you don't peep around with fire. In college I worked on software for a company that owned a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse full of bales of cotton a guy was caught smoking in. They roughed him up a bit. I thought that was going too far until a company we sold to had a huge fire that was a 42 alarm fire. A big fire in a city might be, for example, or 3 alarm fire where 3 different departments respond. They had 42 respond, including 2 different fire departments from railroads. A guy I worked with there said their 200,000 gallon fire pond was emptied without even making a dent in the fire. I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of. And it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then after 2 or 3 hours we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that, while it was new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days, as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was the thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions. And whenever I glanced at her I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came and when we came back she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position and she couldn't work with us there longer. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but I'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is, yes, fake it until you make it can and does work. But you gotta be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. A man was hired to do stock at a tea store that sold lots of delicate china. Manager walked into the back on his third day and saw him just throwing boxes of teacups and teapots. Instantly fired. Wasn't a bull disguised as a man, was he? A minotaur? A manitor. Don't tell Phantom Limb. Day 1 of training. Within the 6th hour of a 8-hour shift. Worked in a rolled crank handle service elevator at a private residential condominium for very wealthy people. We told him just shut up and stare straight ahead. Don't speak unless spoken to. Cause old rich people are mean and don't care about you. Well, what's the new guy do? Starts a conversation right away and asks the resident, how much money do you make? Guy slept through 2 meetings on his first day. The second meeting he started snoring. Oh, I've got one for this. I was hired to do tech support in a call center. On our first day of training there were about 30 of us in a room and we each had our own computer. The instructor said it was okay to use the computer for personal stuff during downtime, but the only rules were no games and no peep. One guy got fired before lunchtime because he just couldn't resist the peep. As a teenager, I worked at a bowling alley. Within an hour, a new girl was fired on the spot for dropping a ball on the foot of a complaining patron. About 35 minutes. I hired a guy to work for me as quality inspector for merchandise headed to Walmart and Target. He bragged about everything he stole from his last job during training and how they paid him more than I did. Well, I'm not holding him back from all that money, so I had some big guys escort him off the property. Didn't like the boss, and on the first day, took a piss in the gas tank of his Jeep. Bragged about it, and it was recorded too. New guy drove a forklift into a fire hydrant in front of a safety rep for the company. His supervisor was called over, and he immediately tells his supervisor that he won't pass a piss test, as he used his only bottle of clean piss earlier that day when he hired in. Everybody standing there immediately burst into laughter, which continued as security also laughing escorted him off-site. Even the supervisor was all gave him a pat on the back and wished him the best of luck. It was wild. She was hired because the manager thought she was hot. Turned out she was 15 and unable to actually work there. I used to do a lot of field work on site investigation programs. Basically we'd hang out on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores. We'd log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. New engineer gets sent to site and gets assigned the night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't. Hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights he calls the office and says he wants to come home because he's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that this job wasn't for him. I got pulled onto that program and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, Buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered. In the middle of February. 3 hours into the first shift. Guy lost it serving an annoying customer in a grocery shop. Throw a cabbage at her. The manager came and told him to go home cause he finished there. He wasn't surprised. I was standing next to him. It was an entertaining day. Did she deserve the cabbage? As a grocery store employee, they all deserve the cabbage. Co-worker. Smoked like every 40 minutes for like 10 minutes. Then asked the boss if he could leave an hour early because he didn't take his lunch break. As my boss said, sure you can, but you don't need to come back. This was just a summer job at a fast food place. We had a new girl start, and within 2 days it was apparent she was an idiot and everyone knew that. You could already see the manager questioning his decision. Then on her 3rd day of work she said she couldn't come in because her mom was in a car accident and in the hospital. Turns out that's an easy thing to disprove in a relatively small town. Semi-related, but back in high school I tried to call out by saying I had car trouble and it had to be towed. My boss then says, oh no problem. I have to pick up my daughter from practice who is out your way anyway, so I can give you a ride. I ended up driving my car out behind my house and parked it on the lawn to hide it and took his ride. Pretty awkward conversation with my parents later about why my car was in their backyard and my boss was dropping me off. Guy showed up to work on his first day with the smell of alcohol on his breath. 7 AM when questioned he admitted to taking a couple swigs on the ways in to calm his first day nerves. Yeah. Fired on the spot. Worked here less than 20 minutes. Had a girl show up for her first day, then no call no show for the next 3 days. Needless to say, she was off the schedule by the 4th day. 4 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store, along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day we were training in the evening, and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart, and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes. Didn't even try to come up with an excuse. Just, yeah, I am. So I needed to leave early on my first day. Basically, he fired her. This guy hadn't even started yet and just had his introductory email sent out to the whole company, which ended with incredibly explicit details about himself. He got fired before he even started. He didn't show up the first day, second day, or third day. I had to work a double shift for 3 days straight. Not fun. I answered the phone when he finally called in on the 4th day. He said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I've been in Orlando. My parents paid for a small vacation as a reward for getting the job. Would it be okay to start next week instead of this week?" Both were at a restaurant. They hired a doorman. Came to work the first day with a gun belt locked and loaded. This was a tiny little New England seafood restaurant and he just needed to check IDs of folks going into the bar. He didn't even get to punch in. On the line we had Penala vodka on the menu. I don't want to ruin the magic that is cookery, but that dish had vodka in it. Bossman go suspicious when he noticed when the level of the vodka dropped, the odder the behavior or our new saute guy became. Before their first day on orientation, I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower, a temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she just needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her not to bother ever coming in. Girl was torn up. She took pictures in the police report into the hiring manager. Tried to explain things to the company, our managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. My document processing clerk was getting married and going on his honeymoon, so I got a short-term temp. It wasn't a temp to hire. Everything was out in the open through a legit temp agency who generally did pretty good screening. The temp's very first day, they show up with a box of things. Photos, mugs, office equipment, pen cup, task light, etc. Stuff to decorate a cubicle with. I advised them not to unpack. We were getting right into training. Within 2 hours, after I cut them loose on a computer with a "let me know if you need anything or have any questions," they said, "This mouse is hurting my wrist. It gave me carpal tunnel. I'm going to need workers' comp paperwork." I made an immediate call to the agency ending this contract, then told the temp, "Your paperwork is at the temp agency office. Go ahead and go see your rep there." They left their box of stuff behind. I had to have the temp agency come pick it up. I was fired on my second day as a line cook at a Mitzel's restaurant in Washington state back in the 90s. Turns out I was hired just to threaten the job security of a long-time line cook with an attitude problem, to keep him in line. He got the message and apologized to the manager, and I was fired for breaking a yolk when flipping fried eggs one time. I'd been a line cook for a few years by then and thought I was doing pretty good. I was taken out the back door and terminated on day 2. That's peeped up. New guy started at work, a bar. Seemed pretty cool. 3 days later we were all sitting around having an end of shift drink when the manager calls the new guy into the office and fires him. New guy isn't 21 yet. Why would you drink at work when the manager damn well knows your age? My sister was fired one day one. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims, so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in the larger world. My older sister worked for him in high school for a year. I worked for him for 2 years. Then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the number one rule in the office was, at work he's not dad. He's the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient her first day, with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot, and I had dragged her out of there. Mom told her at least she'd get paid for the couple of hours she managed to be employed. Less than a week. Hired a new guy at the shop I worked at. When he got hired he did some side work at his house and claimed he did the work at said shop. He put a motor in a truck for some kid and the motor blew. Kid's mom comes to the shop raising hell over our speedy work. GM was out of town on a business trip, so when he came back that Friday he fired him. Bookkeeper. The guy was hired as a senior auditor for the international subsidiaries of our group. Referred to credit and debitors left and right. Maybe bringing a machete into the office on day 2 to slice a watermelon wasn't advantageous either. First week. He's called over to the unstaffed truffle counter by a customer. Hasn't been trained in truffles, so he just grabs one from the display case and sells it to the customer. He doesn't know the display truffles are made of plastic and the customer has already paid $90 for it when he realizes. Still not sure if it was an honest mistake or if he was planning to pocket the money. Either way, fired. Opposite story. At an ed student job at my university, one guy figured out how to automate his punches and got paid for months without showing up. When the university found out, they sent a manager to make sure he was actually there for every shift. He was never fired, and they still paid him for the full shifts. They didn't really care about the job, since they got a tax break just for hiring students. He was escorted out by security on his second day and promptly delivered to waiting police officers, about 5 of them. He'd apparently beaten his wife pretty severely and then just left for work like NBD. Never thought that they'd come looking for him. We used to bet on which new hire would last longer than a week. Gets hired. Celebrates new job. Drug tested. Gone by lunch. I think 2 days. He destroyed some product, but said he wasn't. The boss gave him an order, but he took a walk through the warehouse. He got caught 2 times smoking outside. It's not allowed, we're a food company and have a room for smoking, and he was suspected of stealing, but there was no evidence. This all happened before our supervisor caught him the second time smoking outside and then fired him. Had a co-worker get fired halfway through his first day. Was a well-qualified rep, plenty of industry experience, and seemed cordial enough. He got fired on his lunch break when management and ours took him to lunch, and he made racist jokes about several ethnicities. He was going to be the rep for our El Paso market, which is incredibly diverse, so he was told not to even bother coming back from his lunch break.